I didn't grow up special. I'm just stubborn. They laughed when I said I'd swim 500 miles. I laughed too, till I couldn't sleep at night. If I stop now, it means they were right. So I'm going back out there, one stroke at a time.
This shouldn't have worked, not from the body he started with, and not from the life he was trapped inside. But on a grey morning off the Gulf Coast, a warehouse worker with a borrowed support boat swam 500 miles and bent a record book that was never meant to include someone like him. Stay with me, because the turning point is not what you think. Before anyone cared, Evan Morales was the guy you don't notice. 34, lean in a way that looked more tired than athletic. He moved through Houston like he was trying not to take up space. His apartment sat above a payday loan store, and the hallway always smelled faintly of bleach and fried oil. A rent overdue notice had once been taped to his door, the corner curling like it was embarrassed to be there. On his kitchen counter, a chipped mug held loose change, and a single key for a padlock he used at work. On the wall above that table, Evan kept a faded photo from a city pool. Him at 8, hair plastered to his forehead, grinning like the water had just given him permission to breathe. Behind him stood his dad, work boots, rolled sleeves, one hand resting on Evan's shoulder, proud without knowing how to say it. Evan hadn't been gifted. He'd just felt lighter in water than anywhere else. Life got louder, shifts got longer, and the pool became a memory. Now, when he visited the rehab facility, Evan watched those same hands, knuckles swollen from years of labor, tremble around a paper cup. He carried that image back to his apartment, like a vow he didn't know how to speak. Evan worked nights at a distribution center, box after box, scanner beep after scanner beep, then slept in broken pieces. 2 hours on the couch, an hour at the table with his forehead on his arms, a nap right before the next shift. He wasn't lazy, he was drained. His dad's health had been sliding for years, and the bills arrived faster than the paychecks. When his father moved into a rehab facility, Evan started visiting after work with vending machine crackers and cheap sports drinks, pretending the fluorescent lights didn't make him feel like he was drowning on dry land. The spark didn't look like lightning. It looked like a routine Tuesday afternoon, his father coughing, the TV running local news too loud, the room humming with the sound of oxygen. A segment came on about an open water swim, endurance athletes cutting through a bright strip of ocean, smiling like pain was a hobby. The reporter said the word limit, and then, without meaning to, made it sound optional. Evan wasn't chasing a headline, he was chasing a sentence he wanted to hand back to his father. I didn't let this break me. He also needed something practical. Money for care, proof that their story wasn't only decline and bills. He didn't say any of that out loud, because naming it would make it fragile. So he built it quietly, one unglamorous decision at a time. Evan's dad watched quietly, then said, almost to himself, imagine being able to just keep going. That line sat in Evan's chest for the rest of the day. On the drive home, he turned the radio off, as if silence might help him hear the thought. Keep going, not for trophies, not for social media, just to prove that something in you could outlast everything trying to grind you down. At 3 a.m, after his shift, Evan searched the longest swims on his cracked phone. He read distances that sounded like typos. He read how records weren't won with one brave day, but with hundreds of boring ones. Then he opened his notes app and typed, 500 miles. He stared at it until the screen dimmed, then typed a second sentence. If I can do that, my life can't stay small. He didn't tell anyone at first. He was afraid the words would sound ridiculous once they left his mouth. But the next week, he bought a cheap pool pass with coins and showed up at the community center before sunrise. His towel had frayed edges, his goggles leaked. He got into the lane like he belonged there anyway. On day 3, the lifeguard, a bored guy in his 20s, saw Evan checking a scribbled distance chart and asked, "Training for something?" Evan hesitated and then said it out loud for the first time. "I'm gonna swim 500 miles. The lifeguard blinked, then laughed, quick and unfiltered. 500 miles? Man, you can't even swim 500 laps without getting bored. He shook his head like he couldn't help himself. Don't hurt yourself trying to be a superhero. Evan's face burned. He nodded as if it was a joke and pushed off the wall anyway. He tried to brute force endurance like it was a door you could shoulder open. He held his breath longer. He pulled harder. He treated every lap like a fight. By the third week, his shoulders ached with a bright, deep pain that followed him to work. One morning, halfway through a set, his calf seized so suddenly he thought it had snapped. He grabbed the lane rope, gasping, while the water blurred around him. The lifeguard blew the whistle, not panicked, just annoyed, like Evan had interrupted a normal day. Failure number 1 wasn't dramatic. It was humiliating. It was Evan sitting on cold tile, trembling, realizing willpower alone didn't create distance. He went home, lay on the couch under a fan that clicked like a metronome, and stared at the ceiling while the same question circled. Who do you think you are? When people found out, the doubt arrived fast. A coworker named Malik saw Evan's swim cap hanging from his backpack and asked what it was for. Evan told him. Malik grinned. Bro, you can't even make it through a double shift without looking half dead, he said. You're gonna swim 500 miles. In what, a bathtub? His mother reacted differently. She didn't laugh. She worried, which felt heavier. Over a crackling phone call, she said, Why are you doing this to yourself? You need stability. You need rest. Evan heard fear behind the words, and it pressed on him like a hand on his chest. The pressure got inside him. He started noticing how ridiculous he looked to other people. The damp hair at dawn, the cheap goggles, the notebook full of numbers. One week he skipped a morning, telling himself his body needed recovery. Then he skipped 2, then 3. At work, he avoided Malik's eyes. At home, he avoided his own reflection. When his dad asked, How's training? Evan changed the subject. Failure number 2 looked like silence. It looked like letting the dream shrink because it was easier than being mocked for it. On a rainy Saturday, he sat in his car outside the pool with the engine off, hands on the steering wheel, and realized he was waiting for permission to quit. The thought came clean and tempting. You can stop, and nobody will blame you. He didn't stop, not because he was brave, but because he was tired of watching his life get smaller every time fear spoke. That afternoon, he went to a used bookstore to get out of the rain and found a dog-eared book on open water swimming. Inside the cover, someone had written, You don't conquer distance, you negotiate with it. Evan bought it for $4 and read it at the laundromat while his clothes spun. He learned that endurance was math, not mood, pace, technique, fuel, recovery. The boring parts were the real parts. On Monday, he went back to the pool with a notebook and a different attitude. He wrote down times and strokes. He stopped trying to win each lap. He started trying to be consistent. He taped a small piece of paper inside his locker. Negotiate. The grind didn't look heroic. It looked like 4:12 a.m. alarms, coffee that tasted like burnt pennies, and Evan sliding into cold water while the rest of the city slept. It looked like him leaving the pool with damp hair under a hoodie, catching the first bus to work, feet heavy, eyes gritty. At lunch, he ate the same simple, cheap foods because predictability was a kind of control. He carried a gallon jug and forced himself to drink even when he didn't feel thirsty. He wrote everything down: distance, effort, sleep, soreness, mood. He built tiny rituals to stay honest. After every session, he wrote one line about what went wrong and one line about what went right. He did shoulder rehab with a resistance band in the warehouse break room while microwaves hummed. On nights he couldn't sleep, he watched races and studied how calm the best swimmers looked as if they'd learned to cooperate with pain instead of wrestling it. Month by month, he changed. The first month he swam with fear. Fear of cramps, fear of pain, fear of everyone being right. The second month, he swam with stubbornness, each lap a rebuttal. By the third month, something shifted. Calm focus. He stopped listening for imaginary laughter and started listening to his own breathing. He learned the difference between discomfort and danger, between fatigue and damage. He learned to live smaller so the goal could live bigger. He sold an old guitar. He cancelled subscriptions. He took extra shifts and saved the overtime in an envelope labeled water. When his shoes wore thin, he patched them. When friends went out, he stretched on the living room floor and watched free technique videos until his phone dimmed. After months of pool work, he took his first controlled open water sessions in a lake outside the city. Always with a buoy, always within a designated area, always with safety support nearby. The water tasted metallic and alive. Wind slapped small waves into his face. His heart raced for reasons that had nothing to do with fitness. In open water, you can't see the bottom, and your mind invents stories to fill the dark. He didn't fight those stories. He practiced staying calm through them. He practiced sighting, turning, resetting his breathing. He learned to keep his effort steady even when the surface turned ugly. He started doing longer sessions only when he had support on shore and a plan to stop if his body flagged real trouble. He wasn't trying to be reckless, he was trying to be ready. Nearly a year in, when he finally felt like the dream had weight, the worst day arrived. It started as a normal morning. Evan was halfway through a long set when a hot, bright pain snapped across his shoulder like a wire. His arm went numb for a second. He finished the lap with one arm, pretending it was nothing, then got out and sat shaking on the deck. At work later, he couldn't lift a box without wincing. That night he lay on his couch with ice pressed to his shoulder, staring at the ceiling fan as if it might spin the pain away. A clinic visit confirmed what he feared: overuse, inflammation, a warning that sounded like a closed door. If you keep pushing the same way, the doctor said, you're going to do real damage. Failure number 3 felt bigger because it threatened time itself. Time he didn't have. Money he couldn't waste. The dream didn't feel inspiring now. It felt irresponsible. For a week his mouth stayed dry from stress. His ears rang in quiet rooms. He imagined Malik's "told you so," his mother's relief, his own shame. When he visited his dad, he tried to act normal, but his father noticed the stiffness and asked, "You okay?" Evan almost lied. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed and let the truth spill. "I might not be able to do it," he said. "I might be done." His father didn't perform hope. He just looked at him with steady eyes and said, "Then you adjust." That was it. 2 words. No sermon. No magic. Evan went home and cried in the shower where no one could hear him. Then he did the thing he had avoided. He asked for help. The help arrived in a small, quiet form. At the lake one morning, Evan stood on shore, holding his cap and goggles, not getting in. A woman with grey hair under a visor walked past, carrying a thermos. Sun-worn face, strong calves. She'd seen him training alone for months. She stopped and said, "You're the early guy." Evan tried to smile. "Not today." She nodded toward his shoulder. "Injury?" He admitted it. Her name was Carol, a retired triathlon coach who volunteered with a local swim program. She didn't ask about records. She asked, "What's your plan to heal?" Evan swallowed. "I don't have one." Carol took a sip from her thermos and said, "Then that's why you're stuck." She watched the water like it was a lesson. "You've been trying to muscle your way through. That works until your body calls you on it." Over the next weeks, she showed up without fanfare. Small corrections, less reach, more rotation, use the hips, relax the hand, shorten the stroke to protect the joint. cut distance to rebuild, treat recovery like training, not like weakness. Once, without saying anything, she handed him a roll of athletic tape and walked away. That support was life-changing because it made his dream less lonely. It also made it less chaotic. Carol taught him to build a method that didn't depend on mood. Evan started breaking the goal into pieces his mind could hold. 10-mile blocks, then 20, then longer. He practiced pacing until he could hold a steady rhythm without panic. He rehearsed fueling on long sessions, small scheduled intakes that kept his body from crashing, because endurance wasn't a macho contest, it was management. The turning point arrived one afternoon when the water was choppy and Evan's shoulder was tired but stable. He realized he wasn't fighting anymore. He wasn't trying to win the swim. He was doing his job: show up, execute, repeat. He finally understood what the sticky note meant. Distance wasn't an enemy to crush. It was a negotiation you renewed every hour. When Evan announced an official record attempt, most people still thought it was a joke. He didn't have a big sponsor. He didn't have a glossy team. He had a small circle: Carol, who helped coordinate, his sister Sophia, who checked supplies like she was guarding a fragile miracle, and Malik, who acted unimpressed but took time off to help drive the support boat, because deep down he wanted to see if the impossible was real. The swim would be a continuous multi-day open water route, approved and monitored by officials, with safety protocols and medical checks built in. Evan wasn't trying to cheat death. He was trying to earn a record without cutting corners. The night before the start, Evan sat in a cheap motel near the coast. His gear lay on the bed like he was preparing for surgery. Goggles, spare caps, anti-chafe balm, printed checklists, a small notebook with times and notes. His mother texted, "Please be careful." His dad texted, "Keep going." Evan stared at both until his throat tightened. Morning came with low clouds and wind that smelled like salt and diesel. Evan stepped onto the dock, and the water looked colder than it had any right to be. Officials checked paperwork. Carol spoke with the captain in clipped phrases. Sophia tightened the cooler lid. Malik leaned on the railing with his jaw set, as if he could intimidate the ocean into behaving. Evan slid in, and his body tried to reject the cold. His breath hitched, his skin prickled. Then he started moving, one stroke, another. The boat idled beside him. The shore fell away. As the first day stretched, the wind turned the surface into a restless chop that slapped his face and stole his breath. Rub spots bloomed on his neck and under his arms, and he knew they would become misery if he ignored them. At feeding stops, he held a float line for seconds while Sophia and Carol passed what he needed. Evan didn't linger. The cold crept in the moment he stopped, and stiffness waited like a trap. That night, the ocean sounded deeper. The boat's lights painted trembling paths on the water. Evan's world shrank to breath and stroke, and a private count. 50 strokes. Check the boat. Exhale long. When his thoughts tried to jump to the full distance, he pulled them back to the count, the way you pull a hand away from a hot stove. The first hours were almost peaceful. He found the rhythm Carol had drilled into him. He counted strokes in sets so his mind wouldn't wander. He drank and ate in brief, practiced intervals, never stopping long enough for his muscles to stiffen. When small waves slapped his face, he exhaled longer and kept the cadence. Negotiate. By day 2, the exhaustion changed shape. His hands felt swollen, the skin under his arms burned, his neck rubbed raw. When a wave knocked his goggles crooked and salt water flooded his eye, panic flashed hot and sharp. The old voice screamed, "This is stupid." Evan heard a calmer voice answer, "Fix it. Keep going." He adjusted the strap with shaking fingers and resumed. The second night was the hardest psychological stretch. Darkness turned the world into a narrow tunnel. His breathing, the water, the boat's small lights. The distance ahead became imaginary. which made it terrifying. His mouth went dry despite fluids. His legs felt heavy like sand. At one point he thought, with sudden clarity, I could stop. I could climb aboard. I could sleep. Nobody would hate me. That was the moment Sophia leaned over the rail and held out a bottle, her voice steady. Here. No speech, no performance, just the next thing he needed. Evan drank, felt his body return to the present, and started swimming again. A storm line threatened on day 3, roughening the surface and pushing him off course. The boat corrected constantly. Evan swallowed salt and tasted bile. His shoulders screamed. Officials monitored conditions, ready to pause if safety required. Evan didn't argue with reality. He adjusted his sighting. He shortened his stroke. He conserved. He negotiated. Then a cramp curled his foot inward so hard he yelped. He floated for a few seconds, legs kicking uselessly, heart racing. Failure hovered close enough to touch. The captain eased nearer. Evan forced himself to breathe slowly, loosen the muscle, and restart with smaller kicks. He remembered the pool tile. He remembered the overdue notice. He remembered his father's 2 words. Adjust. Sometime that afternoon, the breakthrough arrived as a strange peace. Evan realized he had stopped thinking about 500 miles. He wasn't fighting the distance anymore. He was simply doing the next 10 minutes, again and again. His mind went still. The ocean didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a conversation. Sip, breathe, stroke, calm, repeat. The record stopped being a fantasy and became a chain of manageable choices. On the final day, the shoreline sharpened into detail. He could smell land, warm sand, vegetation, faint smoke. He could hear distant traffic, an ordinary sound that felt unreal after days of water. On the boat, voices turned clipped and careful. Carol checked documentation like a scientist. Malik stopped joking. Sophia kept wiping her hands on her shorts like she couldn't hold still. Evan's body was beyond tired. It was a single demand. Keep moving. His tongue felt thick. His lips cracked. His shoulders were on fire. But he could also feel every invisible morning behind him. Every alarm, every bus ride, every quiet lap, pulling him forward like a rope tied to his waist. As the final miles arrived, time slowed. Evan felt each stroke with precise clarity. Fingers slicing in, palm catching, forearm pressing, hips rotating. He didn't sprint. He didn't find magical energy. He executed. He held the line. He kept the cadence he had earned. When he reached the designated finish point, he didn't immediately understand it was over. He heard a shout, a whistle, an official's voice calling confirmation. Evan stopped, treading water, blinking salt from his eyes. Then it landed in his chest like heat. 500 miles. Done. He didn't throw his arms up. He just let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and floated on his back for a second, staring at the sky as if it was the only thing sturdy enough to hold his feelings. Malik slammed a hand on the railing and yelled, "You did it!" Sophia covered her mouth with both hands. Carol only nodded, tears shining, as if she'd known this ending was possible the moment he learned to negotiate instead of fight. The reward came in layers. Officials verified the distance and time and recognized the record. Local news showed up, then bigger outlets. Messages poured in from people who used to ignore him. A small sponsor offered support for future events. Malik texted, "Warehouse legend." His mother called crying, her voice shaking with pride and relief. A week later, a modest prize purse and a sponsor bonus hit his account. Nothing flashy, but enough to change his Mondays. Evan paid down the oldest medical bills first. He covered extra rehab sessions insurance didn't want to touch. He bought his mother a plane ticket so she could visit without choosing between travel and groceries. Then he did something he'd never done. He took his dad to the water's edge in a wheelchair, just to sit and watch the horizon. People shifted around him too. Co-workers who used to shrug now asked questions like they were afraid of missing a lesson. Malik told the story to new hires with exaggerated drama, then added, quieter. He earned it. Even the lifeguard from the community pool messaged months later, I was wrong. Respect. Evan read it, smiled once, and kept moving forward. The moment that mattered most happened without cameras. 2 days later, Evan walked into his father's rehab facility, carrying a framed certificate in a grocery bag because he didn't own anything nicer. He set it on the table. World record, it read in bold letters. His father stared, then smiled the way he used to smile before the hard years piled up. Evan sat down, exhausted, and for a long time neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence was full. Monday morning afterward was strangely normal. Evan still woke early, but not to swim. He paid rent on time and bought real groceries without counting every dollar. He returned to the warehouse for one shift, not because he had to, but because he wanted to walk through those doors as someone new. When Malik saw him, he shook his head and laughed softly. Man, he said, I was wrong. Evan didn't gloat. He just smiled, because the victory wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about changing what Evan believed was possible for his own life. And that's why the line from that shaky motel room clip mattered. They laughed when I said I'd swim 500 miles. At the beginning, it was a wound. At the end, it became a compass. People laughed because they couldn't see his method, his discipline, his adjustments, but Evan did. He kept going anyway. So here's my question for you. What dream have you been shrinking to avoid looking foolish? And what would it change in your life if you negotiated with it instead of abandoning it?